Hey, welcome back to the Filmcast. Today I will be reading part 5 of my MonsterVerse continuation series, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. I don't think I need to do any explaining of what will happen, because the title essentially does that for me. With that out of the way, let's get into Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. At Outpost 54, Castle Bravo, Monarch personnel are watching Godzilla's movement and notice that he is moving towards the outpost. The personnel watching this unfold includes Mark, Madison, Chen, Rick, and Sam. Godzilla swims up to the glass that separates him from the Monarch personnel and stops. Godzilla simply looks at them but does nothing threatening to them. Godzilla swims off and Chen comes up to explain that the meaning of this seemingly random encounter was possibly a way of Godzilla telling humanity that he is still on their side. This means that Godzilla believes that he and the other Titans can exist with humanity even though they haven't had a good history over the past few years. This is especially apparent when humanity almost killed Godzilla in 2019 after using the Oxygen Destroyer. Godzilla swims off and begins touring the world to make sure all the Titans that submitted to him stay in check and don't cause destruction. Monarch sends out a drone to keep an eye on Godzilla, but the drone's camera picks up an odd sight. Through the camera's feed, Monarch personnel see a small but fast boat with soldiers on it approaching Godzilla. One of these soldiers, carrying some sort of gun, raises his weapon and fires it at Godzilla. These soldiers are Apex personnel, and the gun the soldier was using fired a mind control device into Godzilla. Right as the gun is fired, the drone's camera cuts and all signal is lost. This is because Apex soldiers noticed the drone and used a jammer to disable it. Monarch personnel review the footage of the now disabled drone and determine that the soldiers are from Apex and realize that Apex is up to something sinister. Mark assigns Sam to intercept Apex communications in an attempt to find out what Apex is planning, while Monarch sends out another drone to see what happens with Godzilla. Godzilla starts behaving strange and breaks off of his path only to land on an island. The drone arrives and through the camera, Monarch personnel see Godzilla start roaring as if he's in pain. This pain is the chip taking over Godzilla's brain, and Godzilla's trying to fight the pain, but ultimately loses. Godzilla temporarily passes out, but then wakes up with a look of anger and rage in his eyes. Godzilla gets back up and enters the ocean, and begins to swim to a certain location. Back at Castle Bravo, Sam intercepts Apex communications about injecting the mind control chip into Godzilla and reports his findings to Mark. Mark sends out an alert to other outposts to watch out for Godzilla. Mark then goes to Rick and asks him to track where Godzilla is going. At Outpost 33, Nick and Audrey are overlooking some upgrades being placed on Mechagodzilla when they too get notifications of Godzilla, and Nick begins to question if they will use Mechagodzilla if Godzilla starts acting destructive, to which Audrey replies with simply saying that she is unsure. Rick continues tracking Godzilla and finds him heading towards Japan. Rick checks to see why Japan and notices that a Titan, Rodan, has been flying across the planet and has taken a break in Japan just outside of Tokyo. Rick alerts Mark and other Monarch personnel of where Godzilla is heading and makes plans to warn the people of Tokyo. As Godzilla approaches Tokyo Bay, Monarch starts moving civilians away from the coast in preparation for Godzilla's arrival. Rodan, who is resting on a mountain, sees Godzilla and approaches him to greet him, but Godzilla responds in a way Rodan wasn't expecting. Godzilla roars at Rodan very angrily and tail whacks him. Rodan flies up, completely shocked by Godzilla suddenly attacking him, and Godzilla starts charging up his atomic breath. Rodan attempts to fly away, but Godzilla shoots him down, and Rodan crashes into the city. Rodan flies back in the air, and instead of flying away, decides to stand up and fight Godzilla. Rodan fights hard, but Godzilla overpowers him, and after another tail whack, pins Rodan to the ground with his foot. Godzilla starts stomping on Rodan, which wounds him, and eventually Godzilla begins charging up another atomic breath blast. Just before Godzilla can blast Rodan, Godzilla is pulled back by another Titan. Godzilla turns around to see Mothra has arrived and was the one that pulled him back. The two square up and Mothra begins to fight Godzilla with Rodan on her side. Now, Mothra knows that Godzilla isn't himself right now. She knows something is making him do this, but she is unsure what. She isn't trying to kill him, but rather just trying to stop him from causing destruction to Tokyo. Back at Castle Bravo, Mark and the others are watching the battle go down. They soon realize that it's only a matter of time before Godzilla defeats and possibly kills Mothra and Rodan, so they begin thinking of ways to help. Rick is ordered to call Outpost 33 and informs them to send Mechagodzilla. At Outpost 33, the message from Rick is received and everyone prepares for Mechagodzilla's first mission. Nick gets in his uniform while everything is put in place, and once it's all set, Nick approaches an elevator to get to the top of Mechagodzilla. Just before he gets on, Audrey walks up to him and the two hug. After that, he gets on and enters Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla is brought to the surface by an elevator, and after being activated, flies off to Tokyo. Nick's mission is to use Mechagodzilla to subdue Godzilla and remove the mind control chip from Godzilla before he can annihilate Tokyo. Castle Bravo is informed that Mechagodzilla is on its way to Tokyo, but then they get a call from Admiral Stenz, who tells them that he's just found out about what's going on in Japan. Sten tells them that some officials suggest they should use an oxygen destroyer, but Mark assures him that's not necessary because the blast will kill civilians in the city and that they already have a plan to deal with Godzilla. Sten is apprehensive of this plan as Mark doesn't totally explain what it is, but gives him the benefit of the doubt and decides to wait for what it is. Back in Tokyo, things are not going well for Mothra and Rodan as they are losing the battle. Rodan goes in to stab at Godzilla with his claws, but Godzilla grabs him and slams Rodan into the ground. Godzilla then grabs Tokyo Tower and slams it on Rodan, pinning him to the ground. Godzilla then turns his attention on Mothra and begins attacking her. Mothra fights Godzilla to the best of her ability, not using all of her powers because she doesn't want to hurt Godzilla, but soon he gets advantage over her. Godzilla grabs Mothra and pins her to a building. Mothra tries to push him away, but his strength is too much for her to handle. Godzilla roars at her and begins charging up again for an atomic blast to finish Mothra. Mothra closes her eyes as she braces to get killed, but just as Godzilla fully charges up, a rainbow-colored beam hits Godzilla in his side, which knocks him away from Mothra. Mothra watches as Godzilla is thrown to the ground by the beam, and then she hears a metallic-sounding roar. Mothra looks over to see what the roar came from, and is stunned by what she sees standing in the distance. Godzilla gets up and is also surprised by what he sees standing in the distance. The two monsters look in awe as what appears to be a robotic doppelganger of Godzilla is firmly standing and looking at both of them. Godzilla approaches Mechagodzilla and roars, which Mechagodzilla does in response, and then the two square up. The two charge at each other and begin fighting hand to hand and start exchanging punches, scratches, bites, and tail whacks. During their exchange of blows, Mechagodzilla throws a punch at Godzilla's jaw, but the punch is caught by Godzilla's hand. Godzilla then tail whacks Mechagodzilla into a building and then blasts Mechagodzilla with a powerful atomic breath attack, which leaves some damage to the mech. Inside of Mechagodzilla, Nick realizes how hard of a fight this will be, so he presses a button and states that he's putting Mechagodzilla into battle mode. Mechagodzilla takes a stance and begins to have some changes brought upon him. A laser cannon rises from each of Mechagodzilla's shoulders and takes aim at Godzilla. Other changes include missile silos rising from Mechagodzilla's back, the tail turning sharp and bladed like a knife, and electric, serrated blades rising above the robot's hands. Mechagodzilla lets out another roar as missiles fire from his back and hit Godzilla. The missiles do little, but give Mechagodzilla the upper hand against the king of the monsters. Godzilla puts up a lot of resistance against Mechagodzilla, but during their fight, Mothra jumps in and aids Mechagodzilla. Mothra, being an intelligent titan, knows Mechagodzilla is not only here to help, but also has no intention of killing Godzilla, just like her. The two fight against Godzilla, and he takes a lot of blows from their unrelenting attacks. During the battle, Mothra flies behind Godzilla, causing him to turn around, and Mechagodzilla takes the chance and delivers a huge punch to the back of the neck. The punch is so powerful, it knocks Godzilla back into a building and to his knees. Mechagodzilla goes in for another punch to get Godzilla to the ground, only to find Godzilla no longer acting aggressive. Mechagodzilla, Mothra, and Rodan approach Godzilla since he's no longer being destructive, and see he's behaving very differently. Godzilla gets up to his feet and is surprised to see Mechagodzilla, as if he's never encountered him before, and is also surprised to see the destruction of Tokyo. The reason Godzilla's behaving this way is that the punch he received to the back of the neck actually disabled the chip that was controlling him. Godzilla also has no recollection of anything he's done ever since the chip took control of him, so he has no idea that this destruction was his fault. Castle Bravo, along with Admiral Stenz, watch this occur, and Stenz asks why Godzilla is suddenly neutral. Mark explains the situation that they saw with Apex, and explains that they are essentially the ones responsible for the destruction of Tokyo. At an Apex base, a soldier overlooking the situation in Tokyo is ordered to try and get the chip working again. Back in Tokyo, a few civilians who were still in the city stop running and slowly approach the Titans after the destruction suddenly stops. Mechagodzilla turns and looks down at all the people looking at the Titans in awe. Things go well until Godzilla starts roaring in pain and collapses to his knees. Apex managed to reactivate the chip, and the chip is starting to take over his mind. Nick turns to the nearby Japanese civilians and alerts them to run and get to safety before Godzilla becomes violent again. As the chip starts taking over Godzilla, he roars at Mothra and Rodan in a way as if he's telling them something. He then closes his eyes and falls silent. Godzilla, having been taken over by the chip, again, awakens and after taking just one look at the trio, fires his atomic breath at them. The three monsters are thrown back, and Godzilla, now back in his enraged state, starts overpowering them. Mechagodzilla gets back up and stands up against Godzilla, and the two once again start fighting. Rodan flies in to strike at Godzilla, but Godzilla grabs him and throws him into the ocean, then starts to drown him. Mothra jumps onto Godzilla's back and pulls him away from Rodan, giving him time to recover and get out of the water. Mechagodzilla decides to make a drastic move to get Godzilla to fall so he can remove the chip. Mothra manages to force Godzilla to Mechagodzilla, and Mechagodzilla charges at the king with one of his serrated blades. Mechagodzilla stabs Godzilla in the arm, and Godzilla lets out a roar of pain. Which is followed by the blade starting to electrocute Godzilla. Godzilla desperately tries to get the blade out of his arm, but his efforts are worthless as he grows weaker with the blade continually shocking him. Mechagodzilla pulls the blade out of Godzilla's arm when he is weak enough, retracts the blade back into the arm of the robot, and punches Godzilla to the ground. Godzilla tries to get back up, but Mechagodzilla holds him down by the head and pulls out the blade. Inside of Mechagodzilla, Nick activates Mechagodzilla's X-ray vision to determine where the chip is. Nick is planning to find the chip and using the serrated blade, cut Godzilla open and remove the chip. Godzilla sees Mechagodzilla pulling out the blade, and thinking Mechagodzilla intends to kill him, starts charging up, much to Nick's confusion. Nick is confused because he's holding down Godzilla's head, so Godzilla shouldn't be able to unleash an atomic breath attack. Mothra and Rodan start flying at Godzilla. Mothra intends to paralyze him, while Rodan plans to hold Godzilla down to ensure he doesn't get back up. Godzilla fully charges up and lets out a roar. Nick suddenly realizes what Godzilla is about to do, but it's too late to stop it. Godzilla unleashes an atomic pulse which knocks all three monsters off of him. Mechagodzilla, Mothra, and Rodan are thrown back and are heavily wounded by the blast. Mechagodzilla gets up only to see a visibly pissed off Godzilla standing there, who unleashes another atomic pulse, which knocks the Metal King back to the ground. Godzilla grabs Mechagodzilla by the tail, picks him up, and throws him through a series of buildings. Godzilla charges at Mechagodzilla, grabs him by the shoulders, and starts slamming his robotic double into the ground over and over again. Mechagodzilla manages to fight Godzilla back by firing his rainbow beam and maser cannons at Godzilla, which knocks him back. Mechagodzilla gets back to his feet and continues his fight with Godzilla, but Godzilla gains the upper hand since the atomic pulse attack left many damages to Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla fights hard, but Godzilla eventually overpowers him. But things change when Mothra flies in and intends to use her stinger to halt Godzilla's unrelenting attacks, so Mechagodzilla can get the chance to finish the fight. Mothra flies into Godzilla and attempts to stab him, but Godzilla manages to grab her and is about to throw her. Just as Godzilla throws Mothra, she manages to stab him with her stinger, stunning him and causing him to fall to the ground. Mechagodzilla quickly approaches Godzilla and once again holds him down with the intent of removing the chip. This time, however, Godzilla can't fight back because of Mothra's stinger. Mechagodzilla pulls out his blade and uses it to cut an open into the back of Godzilla's neck, which is where the chip is. Mechagodzilla sees the chip, grabs it, and then rips it out of Godzilla. Mechagodzilla takes one look at the chip and crushes it with his hand, finally ending the battle. Godzilla, after having the chip removed, falls quiet and closes his eyes. Nick calms down now that the battle is over and sees Mothra and Rodan slowly approach Godzilla. Godzilla wakes up to see Mothra looking at him, and this brings him back to his original peaceful state. Mechagodzilla walks up and helps Godzilla get to his feet. Godzilla first gets a little suspicious seeing Mechagodzilla's large array of weapons, but his suspicions fade away when the weapons retract back into the robot. Out of respect for Godzilla, Nick decides to make Mechagodzilla bow to Godzilla to show that he recognizes him as the king of the monsters, similar to the way Zilla did back in New York City. Japanese civilians reemerge from the rubbles of Tokyo and start approaching the Titans once again. The citizens start cheering for the Titans, mainly Mechagodzilla, recognizing them as the savior of their city. Rodan and Mothra fly off in separate directions, Rodan going back to his home in Mexico, while Mothra flies off back to Infant Island. Godzilla leaves next. He walks into Tokyo Bay, gives one last look at Mechagodzilla, and then swims away. Nick is given the order to return to Outpost 33, which he prepares to do, but before leaving, he looks back at the people cheering to him and gives them a nod. This nod Mechagodzilla gives to the people of Tokyo is a sign showing them that he is on their side. Mechagodzilla lets out a metallic roar in the air as a sign of victory. And flies off back to Outpost 33. Monarch personnel at Outpost 33 celebrate their victory and soon get a call from Admiral Stenz, who not only congratulates them, but also says that the government has decided to shut down Apex after they have caused too much death and destruction. He explains that all of Apex's material will be confiscated and their prisoners, who once worked for Alan Jonah, will be transferred to a federal prison. A few hours later, Mechagodzilla arrives back at Outpost 33 and goes back into the outpost. Mechagodzilla immediately starts going under repairs as Nick exits the mech and reunites with Audrey. As the two embrace, they are informed that Mark wants the two to meet him and the others at Outpost 95 to celebrate their victory. A few days later, everyone arrives at Outpost 95, which is located in Japan, meet up, and start celebrating. Later that night, an exhausted Nick tells everyone he's going to get some rest. Nick walks to a room where he will rest for the night, but during his trip, he walks past a room where a scientist is talking to someone about the experiments they have been studying. A soldier comes in and tells the two that they have been ordered to exterminate the creatures that they have been studying. The soldier and scientist walk off as the other scientist grabs a flask full of dirt, which is where the little creatures have been kept. The scientist grabs the flask and is about to leave the room but stops when he hears something hit the ground. He turns around to find a small pile of dirt on the ground. He looks back at the flask and realizes that there is a small hole in it, meaning that the creatures inside have escaped. Upon realizing this, the scientist mutters two words, "Oh no," and the movie ends. In a post-credit scene, an alarm is sounded, and 4 Monarch soldiers armed with assault rifles enter the science lab. They have been tasked with finding and capturing the escaped creatures. The soldiers look around, but out of nowhere, the lights in the room go out, so the soldiers turn on flashlights on their guns. As the 4 look around, the one in the back hears a noise behind him and turns to check. Behind him, a sharp-bladed tail descends from the ceiling and stabs the soldier in the chest, killing him, and the tail pulls the dead soldier into the ceiling. The other 3 turn to notice the 4th soldier gone. They call for him, but out of nowhere, another tail appears, stabs another soldier, and drags him into the roof too. The last 2 soldiers realize the creatures are in the ceiling, so they raise their guns and shoot. They run out of ammo and question if they killed the creatures, but one drops from the roof and lands right behind them. They turn around and shine their flashlights, then start raising them to the creature's head. They point their lights at the creature's head and pause at the sight of the creature because of its horrific appearance. The creature roars at them, and the screen cuts to black. The screen then says in text, "To be concluded in destroy all monsters." So that was Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. I'm gonna be honest, it's probably my least favorite of all my MonsterVerse stories, but I wouldn't say I hate it by any means. Join me next time when I read the final part of my MonsterVerse series, Destroy All Monsters. Until then, peace out.